All right. Good evening. I want to welcome you. Is our screen ready to go? Get that one set up. Turn our projector on.
If I tell you what's on my screen, it won't really be helpful. I don't. Unfortunately, it would be helpful, but I've been running a little too much this week. There it is.
All right. Well, we appreciate Pastor Andrew McCrary being out with us this week. Thank you so much for taking time with us and blessing our church. We appreciate that very much.
Faithful listeners here.
Yeah, there's a couple more walking in right now, and a couple that have interacted with us online, and just getting our screen going. Is it?
No, that would help, wouldn't it?
Sometimes if you restart it, they don't give you your notes. Good deal. Let's begin with prayer this evening. We'll bow our heads. Heavenly Father, we have spent time with you this week exploring this area of our lives. We want it to be all of yours, everything that we have and everything that we are, including our finances, and that nothing will happen by accident in our lives, but that it'll be planned and it'll be intentional and it'll prioritize your kingdom and the people that you've given us. We pray in Jesus' name, amen.
Well, good evening, and thank you for spending this final night of our 4 nights together. And tonight, as we turn to retirement, our first time together, we talked about the 7 major steps financially, and the last one was to have retirement fully funded and the ability to be more generous. Tonight, we're talking about the nuts and bolts, at least of some aspects of retirement. And a number of you could fill me in on the wonders of retirement. But don't want to hear that. But we're going to look at some of the nuts and bolts. And so some of the things, for those of you who are enjoying retirement, this will be something that would happen for somebody looking forward to retirement. But let's journey through. I look forward to some of your feedback. And as we think about how things have changed over time, there have been some major changes. One that strikes me is, as I did a recent seminar on Ellen White and the early pioneers, one of the interesting things was how very different their economics were in this respect. Labor was super cheap, and conveniences were very expensive. You remember if you've looked at some of the things like with bicycles, something that for us are super cheap. I mean, you can go to Walmart and you can get a bike that's going to run you for quite a while for very, very little, a couple hours work. Whereas back then it could be just weeks and weeks or more of work to buy a bicycle. And yet you could hire labor very inexpensively. When they built churches, etc., the labor was cheap. People could afford to have somebody to work their little hobby farm. They could actually afford that without being wealthy, etc. So it's interesting how things change, and I wanted to take a look at some of the changes in here, looking at the median U.S. home price. If you look at what it costs to buy the median house in the U.S. back to 65 and moving forwards, 20,000, 23,000, 38. etc. And then here we are at about 330 2 years ago. Major changes. And if we inflation adjust those, of course, the 20,065 is worth more today. So here's the same inflation adjusted. Still not bad. I mean, in 65 to get the inflation adjusted house, the house that would be very similar to what we would pay, 333,000, 169,000. It even drops there. You see a couple recessions in there, drops to 162, and then again you see a drop there, a very substantial drop in 95, etc. So things have changed, and homes are one of the things that have gone up significantly to none of our surprise. That's not news to anybody here, especially in the Spokane area. That would be another big one, wouldn't it? When we bought our first one, which was right around 95, that's where we paid $68,000 for our little house. A little easier to start out as a pastor with $68,000 mortgage. Some more change. Used to be, it was not uncommon to have one employer for life, right? Not everybody, but it was not uncommon to go to work, and you could work for a hospital system, you could work for GE, you could work for some financial firm for life. Here the average individual will have 12 different jobs in their career span. That's 12 plus. And so for those who still have one or two employers, that can be a serial number of jobs that, it may be a whole stint of jobs, or we're seeing even more of is mixing and matching, right? You work part-time here, part-time there, etc. Other change, we had a pension or a defined benefit. You knew that when you retired, you would get X. And it didn't matter how you invested, because you didn't have to worry about investing. The company was investing for you. It could be, if you're working for the government, it was a PERS plan or something like that, or other plans, whereas now we have the defined contribution. Company tells you, here's what we'll put in, and then we'll see what happens to it. And whatever happens to it is what you get at the end. Not all bad, but a very different arrangement, and forcing people who may have no desire to be into money to have to make some big decisions that can affect their life. Life expectancy back 1940 was 58 years for men, 62 years for women. And we need to frame that a little bit, because if you made it to 21, you could get a little higher life expectancy. That first one is we had such low, we had a high infant mortality or young child mortality. But still, if you made it to 21, there was about a 50-50 chance you'd make 65. That's the same year, 1940, when Social Security started making payouts. And so that was kind of what we were looking at. Life expectancy now, 76 years for men, 81 years for women, and we've got 54 million over 65 today, kind of the old traditional retirement age that keeps indexing up, but 65 was kind of that age. So a lot of change, which means that planning for retirement has never been more important or more challenging. I visit with any number of people who are so frustrated, saying, I don't know what to do, and here I am supposed to be the one making financial decisions. And so I think it's extremely helpful for us. I like this quotation by Walt Disney. The way to get started is to quit talking and begin doing. And if we could say anything about retirement, that's probably one of the best pieces of advice, is to do it. It's so easy to be put off by the difficulty to never get around to doing it. A couple things I just want to share here. They'd be the good things you could fill in if I had a handout, but I just wasn't able to get it out today. But number one, time is on your side when you're young. Right? One of the two pieces of the big retirement equation is time and interest. And when you're young, it's all in your favor. You can afford to be aggressive, you can do all that kind of stuff and not worry too much. Number two the next one is talking about risk versus reward. Can anybody help me out with what we're talking about here when we talk about risk versus reward? Okay. Yes. How you might invest your money? Are you going to be conservative? That is, take an approach that shouldn't lose much money, but doesn't make as much, or take more risk, something that has potential to be up, but also corresponding potential to be down. So how are the two interconnected? Well, the more risk you take, the more reward you get. If I sit in CDs, I'm not taking much risk, am I? Am I going to get a lot of reward? If I choose to go for Microsoft, am I taking some risk? Sure. Is there the potential for the reward? Yes. My CD is never going to exceed a couple percentage points and is never going to do much more than inflation. Maybe a couple percentage points. The other has the potential to go up significantly. It, of course, because it's what we call volatile, that is, it has a big range. It can go up and down. It can go down as well. To get reward, you have to take risk. It's just it's actually part of life, isn't it? There's any number of places where to be rewarded, you got to take some risk. I mean, asking my wife out on that first date, talk about risk, Man, your hands are clammy or shaking as you pick up the phone, and number one, will you get a yes? And then the next risk is how will things go, and etc. So there's a lot of areas in life that risk and reward go together. You don't normally get lots of reward with minimal risk. I can't think of too many areas. So it is in planning with retirement. So what about inflation? How does this factor in? Go ahead. I think you're going to say something. It looks like. Okay, we can just watch it. But it doesn't go fast, right? So it doesn't feel too threatening. If I have a savings account or maybe even that CD, it might only keep pace with inflation. Or if it's a savings account, it might come under inflation, right? But it feels very safe. And I have colleagues who are averse to this whole investing thing. And they're sitting down there. Well, it feels comfortable. But of course, the frog in the beaker felt comfortable too, right? As the temperature went up. So inflation is a very insidious thing because it's slow and painless. You don't feel it. It's not like going up here and taking some risk where you feel it if something goes down. Instead, you just slowly watch your buying power drift away, or maybe you match inflation, but your money's not going anywhere, and none of us, that's too strong. few of us make enough that we'll get to retirement just by stockpiling some savings. It needs to grow somehow, right? Now, for many of us, if we've had a defined contribution or defined benefit plan or a pension, the company took the risk, not us, and they were able to spread that out. I squeaked in with I've got a little tiny defined benefit for my first couple years of working, and after that, I'm joining everybody else on the defined contribution plan. So inflation is something, it's on our mind now, but the last 5 years have been so easy that it's easy to forget that inflation's out there and it makes a difference. Here's another I want to share. Time diminishes risk. There are things that are risky and inappropriate in the short term that are perfectly fine in the long term. Let's imagine that I'm saving for a down payment on a house, and I expect to put my down payment down in 2 years. Where am I going to be on the continuum of conservative to aggressive? I want to be pretty conservative, don't I? I wouldn't mind if it grew by a percentage or 2 or 3, maybe, but there's no way I'm going to take the ride up and down that would come otherwise. Let's see if I have a graphic for this. I think I do. Here's the market. The S&P is probably a good approximation for the larger U.S. market. We call it a proxy for the market. It's a good stand-in. And you can see the value of the S&P over time. Now you can see if you started somewhere in here and went up to here, do you worry about those dips if you're going to be in it for that long? You don't, do you? But if you got in here and you expect to get out here, is that going to be a little unnerving? So time diminishes risk, and this is what I wish I could share with everybody for the first time getting into the market is if you've got time, if I've got 35 years till retirement, I don't have to worry too much. In fact, these little things offer buying opportunities, right? It's like a little yard sale. I'm getting things at a low cost, but my emotions tell me when it's up at some nice little peak, I'm so excited I want to put my money in. And then when it drops, oh no, I think I better hold on to it. But in the reverse, I really should be doing what I can to put money in those down times and just holding tight when it's going up. So this is where I see so many people that when we hit these, I had a good friend, older than I am. When we had the big drop in 2008, they knew that the whole thing was done and the market was going to crash, and they literally buried their money in the backyard in a canning jar. Stuck thousands of dollars out there and put it in. And we see people do that, maybe not a canning jar, but they pull out when the market goes down, and then when it's going really good and they feel this is a safe time to get in, as it's going up, they jump back in. That's a losing game, isn't it? So time diminishes risk. And if you don't have a lot of time, then you just want to be appropriately more conservative. I recently was helping somebody, and they're going to be in different investments than I am because they've got a time horizon of 2 to 3 years. Well, you can't be very aggressive with that. So time diminishes risk. Some years ago, a lady walked into the president's office at the University of Mississippi, and She didn't look like any candidate for college. She didn't look like she'd have any kids who were candidates for college. But she came in and said, I want to make a gift of $150,000. She had left school at age 6th grade, still young, but not near that young. Left school after 6th grade, and her desire had always been to be a nurse. That was her goal in life. As a little girl, she thought it would be so great to care for other people. Well, she ended up caring for her aunt, and that's why she had to leave school at such a young age. And she joined her mother taking in laundry, and so she did laundry for people all over for years. In fact, that's what she did for her entire life. And finally she quit because of advancing arthritis. 75 years of work. Her name was Osceola McCarty. And she came in, she walked onto this campus and said she wanted to set up something for $150,000. Well, they started asking, who is this? And here's a couple other details kind of that I've shared with you, but she worked as a washerwoman and those wages all her life. She never owned a car. At age 87, she made that $150,000 gift to University of Southern Mississippi. And she just lived simply, she valued work, and she saved consistently beginning in the 6th grade. Washerwomen don't make a lot of wages, but she saved. She had one of the two major elements. She had time, and she just kept saving and saving and saving. Here are a couple of the statements she made on work. She said, I knew there were people who didn't have to work as hard as I did, but it didn't make me feel sad. I mean, she left at 6th grade. I love to work, and when you love to do anything, those things don't bother you. It's just a great attitude. Her life, she never had a TV. I think she had a black and white TV, and when her banker suggested she could afford a color TV, she said, no, I don't need it. Black and white's just fine with me. She belonged to the Baptist church down the street. Just a very humble lady. On saving money, she said, a smart person plans for the future. You never know what kind of emergency will come up, and you can't rely on the government. Now there, she's really smart, right? You can't rely on the government to meet all your needs. You have to take responsibility for yourself. Just great. These are some of the quotes that came out after she made headline news everywhere. People were wondering, how in the world does somebody who's been a washerwoman make this kind of an impact in lives? And to date, that gift has given out over $500,000, I think, to would-be nurses coming to University of Southern Mississippi. She also said this to say, there's a lot of talk about self-esteem these days. It seems pretty basic to me. If you want to feel proud of yourself, you've got to do things you can be proud of. Feelings follow actions. Very, very impressive. And it's fun to see there's a number of pictures of some of the students that came because of her gift and were able to go to school and do what she couldn't do, she wanted them to do. Here's what her banker said, and she only got a banker later in life. So she just did the basic savings herself for years and years. But she ultimately, the banker noticed this account that just kept growing and growing and said, can I be of help? Here's what he had to say. He said, I'm one of the bankers who helped her with financial matters. I have often tried to explain to folks that Miss McCarty's most remarkable feat was living as long as she did. So time. She had the time component. She also found a way to save a little bit of money every week. Time was able to turn even the modest returns of her early investments into hundreds of thousands of dollars. And then he said if we'd been able to introduce her to equities earlier, she would have left millions instead of thousands. He said if we could have given that other component, she had time and she was steady, if we could have also given the other component, she'd have been leaving gifts of millions of dollars. And here she is with her Bible. She said, "When I leave this world, I can't take nothing away from here. Whatever I have, it's going to be left right here for somebody. Some child can get their education to help them along because you can't do nothing now unless you get your education. I don't regret one single penny I gave to the college. My only regret is that I didn't have more to give." To me, this emphasizes, above and beyond the huge, generous spirit that inspired her, the two components that we're looking at when it comes to retirement: time and interest. So the big thing is to invest early and regularly. Albert Einstein said, "Compound interest is the eighth wonder of the world. He who understands it earns it. He who doesn't pays it." Pretty much on target. Let me give you a couple scenarios that just help us put this into perspective. Tom begins investing $1,200 annually, so $100 a month, earning 10% return in his IRA when he gets his first solid job out of college. He does this for 15 years, then he quits. When he retires 40 years later, he has just over $450,000, or about 25 times his that should not be annual, his total investment. Okay, don't worry about the figures. 450 is not what you want to retire on, but this is for illustration only. So he puts this in. Next one is, Tom's friend Bob works for 15 years. So they're running parallel, except that Tom began investing right away. Bob worked 15 years, and he decides he needs to start investing. How much will he need to invest annually to have the same amount as Tom? So he's now got 25 years to play catch up. Tom did it for 15 years and then quit. Never made another investment in his retirement account. Bob starts about the same time Tom quits. He now has 25 years. How much does he need to invest annually to have that $450,000? Anybody want to take a guess? So $10,000 annually. You're saying 3 times, so $3,600. He's going to need to do 42 every year for 25 years. And he's going to put in, his investment will grow 4 times, whereas Tom's investment grew 25 times. What's the difference? They were getting the same amount of money. One started early, the other played catch up, right? The big takeaway here, you want both, and time will actually make up for money. That's my... So this is where it's like, boy, if I could grab kids straight out of college. I mean, retirement feels so far away. It's feeling a little closer for me, but it's still too far. But 15 years versus 25, and having to put away a whole lot more. So makes a big difference. Well, let me throw in a third one. John received some money from his grandparents at graduation, $10,050. And he invests it as did the others, but never adds to it, doesn't do another solitary thing. How much will he have after 40 years? Same terms, 10%, etc. What do you think? What's he going to have? He's just a one-timer. Anybody? The same amount. Time. Time. When you use time, when you put time on your favor. Now, we already dealt with this, but it just makes me think, what happens when we have debt? It's the same thing. I mean, what did Albert Einstein say? You know, it either works for you or against you. I've never made a ton of money, nor have I made a ton of money investing, but I do like to work for my money once and let it work for me from there on, if possible. I don't want to have to work for my money twice, and that's what happens when we get into debt, right? Your money keeps you working for it rather than it working for you. So if there's anything I would say, and this kind of goes back to one of the deadly sins of estate planning. The worst is not doing anything. Well, that's about the same with this. You want to start, even if it's small. I mean, this is relatively small when you look at it, a one-time $10,000 shot. And then it just keeps working away. Very impressive what interest will do. And it's the magic of compound interest. And his investment grows 45 times. So, does good things. And I had to throw this in there. And again, just a reminder of negative interest. The average credit card debt in America is a little over $6,000. And remember, if it's average, there's more. Because there are others who don't. In fact, I just read, I had never seen this stat before, almost a quarter of Americans are debt-free. So we'd like to think more, because when we look at, what was that, 50-some million who are in retirement, you'd like to wish that every one of them was debt-free. That's not even counting those younger who ultimately you'd hope might be debt-free, but about 23. So that means that pushes the average up on the other side. Average credit card interest, look at that. This is what you would die to invest with, right? I mean, to be able to get 14.5%, wow, that would be a killer. I guess if you own the credit card stock, maybe you are making that. So, and then the average total debt here in America, and this would include mortgages, etc., which if there's a debt that's, dare I say, good, you are at least investing in an asset that most likely is going to appreciate. So that doesn't worry as much as the other debt that's just draining you. And when you get rid of it, it's like getting a pay increase. There are a lot of people out there who could have a pay increase if they just get rid of their debt. So how am I doing? How do I figure out if I'm on track or not? Well, the internet has some really nice estimating tools. And I want to emphasize a couple things about them. Number one, they're ballpark estimates. They're just going to be something that gets you, are you in trouble? Are you doing pretty decent? Are you going to make it? They can give very rough approximations. Second, good input equals good output. The more detail you can give it, the more accurate it's going to be. And third, it's no substitute for seeking professional advice unless you are pretty financially savvy. So here's an example of a very simple lifetime income calculator. So you see it just asks you what age do you want to retire at, what's your current account balance in your retirement plan, what's your annual contributions, how many years till you retire, and when do you want to start this date? Is this today or some other? And it will calculate it for you. You can see it here. I threw in some numbers, retirement age of 65, current account balance of $275, putting in $10,000 a year, and 20 years to retirement. So that'd be somebody at 45. And then it spits out some very basic information. Not bad to look at periodically and just say, what does this look like? What could it be? And by the way, if there are any of you in here who like playing with the QR codes, I threw that up there, and most phones will grab that from a long ways away. So I've put together a number of calculators that I found of interest. So you can shoot that at the screen and pick up the calculators. Here's one that just gives you an idea of what a little more complicated one looks like. So it asks for your age and all that kind of stuff. It allows you to tweak it as far as what do you expect you'll get. So if you know that you're a more conservative investor or a little more aggressive investor, you can make assumptions based on that kind of stuff. You can even play around with it. This one's really nice. You can say that I want to adjust for inflation. I'm going to do a one-time lump sum payment or deal with some retirement streams, etc. So there's some nice options up there. And again, that's all on that list. I didn't bring a handout, and it's who wants to type in an address that long anyway? So you can go ahead and get that off that code. It gives you something like this. It actually tells you what your current savings would bring for you, what you really need to achieve the desired result, and then, are you getting a nice start? Are you getting warm? Are you on track? So not a bad one. I put together some, and there are lots of them. Just don't feel that they're the final word on anything. So let's talk about some financial vehicles and just some different things, terms that you run into, and let's talk about them. How would you define stocks, or how would you describe stocks to somebody who has never heard of stocks? What are they? They are ownership in a company. So you're buying into a company, and you're buying into its ups and downs, right? If they do well, you would do well. If they don't do so well, you won't do so well. Do stocks on average, and this is a huge generalization, on average, do stocks, where do they tend to come on the conservative to more aggressive? This is a big generalization. They tend to occupy more space up here on the aggressive. Now, you can get very conservative, yes, and you can get extremely aggressive, yes, but they tend to bunch. If we were to do a bell curve, they tend to be up here on the spectrum. So how about bonds? How would you describe bonds? What are bonds? Okay, yes. Piece of government debt, piece of corporate debt, piece of municipal debt. When a big water system goes in or some other thing, it's debt. So what you're doing, instead of owning a slice of the company, you're being the bank to the government, to corporations, to municipalities, etc. Where do they tend to be on that spectrum? More conservative. Again, big generalization, because you can get debt that, well, if the debt is a little iffy, they're going to have to pay you more interest to take it, right? You're not going to loan them. So if you have what's called junk bonds, they usually aren't totally junk, but you get much more interest, but you take some risk. I mean, people who borrow can go south. Corporations can go south. Governments default on bonds sometimes, etc. So usually you'd like to have some kind of a mix. a very general rule of thumb is that you start out mostly stocks when you're young, and then you weave in more bonds as time goes by. The bonds help take out the bumps in the road. They're like shock absorbers. They don't go up as far, they don't go down as far. And so you weave more and more of that in. One rule of thumb, and rules of thumb are just helpful to know, but nothing you want to stake everything on. But one rule is to take 110 minus your age. Okay, so you take 110 minus your age, and that's how much you should have in stocks. That's the percentage. If you're a little more aggressive, you go for 120 or 125 minus your age. It used to be less. The wisdom was less, but the problem is we're living longer in retirement, and we still need some of those stocks along with those bonds to help us keep going, because the investing doesn't stop necessarily when we retire. Many people still have to make their nest egg last, and so those are two of the things that we weave in. Okay, what's a mutual fund? Where does this fit in this stock, bond, and other universe? A mutual fund is like taking a big basket and throwing a bunch of often similar stocks or bonds into it. So instead of riding solely on Microsoft's ups and downs, which could get you seasick, Apple's a little more actually rough. Microsoft is now a more mature company. It doesn't have the ups and downs. Apple does more variations, although they're pretty lucrative right now. But you take this basket and you put them all in, and that way, okay, if one or two go way up and one or two go way down and a lot go kind of up and kind of down, it smooths out your ride. Not only that, but you can afford to actually have little slices of a lot of companies without buying a single stock, especially if that single stock is $1,000 a stock. It's kind of hard to buy those. Now you can buy a group of them. I find mutual funds to be much more accessible to most of us. It's a little harder to put together a portfolio of just individual stocks and bonds, whereas mutual funds, you can get mutual funds that are focused on bonds or even conservative bonds or what they call junk bonds. They're not the worst thing, but you don't want to own just junk bonds. And then some very solid income stocks, etc. So you can have this mutual fund that actually will put all those together, or a segment. So mutual funds, and the nice thing is you can get into them for usually $25 a month. You can get in, if you will promise to put in $25 a month, they'll waive the larger $2,500 minimum to get in, just to get started, which is a great way for somebody who's wanting to get into it. So mutual funds can be very helpful. Here's a couple mutual fund families that I like. There are plenty of other good ones, but these are some solid, long-term mutual fund companies. Vanguard's one of the very earliest. They've been around forever. They're very conservative, and they were run by a fellow he's probably the best known person in mutual funds. T. Rowe Price is good. Fidelity is one of the largest, if not the largest fund. It's very big, and if you can't find a fund you like in Fidelity, you'll never find a fund, because they have scads of funds. Everything from super conservative to aggressive. So those are some nice ways that most of us can get into things like this. Annuities, Annuities are put out by insurance companies, and they're a contract. It's a great way to make sure that you don't outlive your income stream. And so you put down a lump sum, and then they'll set something up that will give you a stream of income coming in that you don't have to worry if the market goes up, the market goes down, that stream will be there. It can be inflation adjusted if you want, so it grows over time so you don't slowly erode your buying power. And I just put immediateannuities.com up there because if you want to know the rates of things, it's a perfect place to go. It doesn't cost you anything to get a whole bunch of estimates, and if you want to see what an annuity is worth, basically as our age increases and as the interest rate increases, what you'll get will go up. So you can do the immediate annuities. You can do annuities that say, I'm going to start paying in now, and it will start paying out when, and you can specify an event, when I retire, or if I pass away, now it goes to my child or something like that. So I just put that up there for you. Annuities are a way to help that income stream. You feel better about it not going up and down. And then IRAs, as far as something that you can put money into. You've got traditional IRAs, you've got Roth IRAs, those are a little newer. And the beauty, to me, the beauty of a Roth IRA is one that when you put it in, if you need that money, you can pull it out penalty free. You can't take out anything that it earned, but you can pull it out, what you put in, penalty free if you really have to. Now, you don't want to if you can't help it, but you can actually have a savings account in an IRA and kind of get two things at once. Otherwise, you've got to be 59 and a half to begin withdrawing from the traditional IRAs. They have limits. You can put in $6,000 per person per year, or $7,000 if you're 50 or above. Yes. The Roth IRA, you don't want to pull it out. I mean, it's designed, but you can pull out what you put in at any time. Yes, and that should be the 59 and a half. And I'm saying should. I'm a little fuzzy on that one. I'm pretty solid, but I don't want to say for certain here. But yeah, the beauty is, another thing, you're putting money in that's already been taxed, and that money will be tax-free to you the rest of your life. Whereas a traditional IRA, you haven't paid tax on it when you put it in, so when you take it out in retirement, the idea is you'll probably be living at a lower income, and taxes will hopefully be less. So that's the difference. Traditional IRA, you will pay tax. Roth IRA, you've already paid tax, and so you won't do it again. So that's, in a nutshell, the big idea behind it. I want to talk just a bit about putting money into retirement. And as we've said, if you're going to build a retirement, you're going to have to invest in some of these things, or you're going to watch inflation just take away everything that you have as far as buying power. Schwab Financial ran a ton of experiments looking at the market, etc. But this one was taking 5 imaginary people who, from 2000 to 2020, each had $2,000 to invest every year for 20 years. And then they looked at different styles. So they took the different styles and they looked at real life scenarios in those 20 years. So this was, what's the best way to invest? Do I wait until I think the market's at the low point and drop my money in? Do I do it right away, etc.? So here's what they had. I thought it was very interesting. I wanted to share it with you. I've never seen it run in this way over the 20-year period. So this is real money, real market conditions. So Peter Perfect, he's a perfect market timer. He had the incredible skill or luck and was able to place his $2,000 into the market every year at the lowest closing point. So they took the market, and every year they found the lowest point, and in their market scenario, they put in the $2,000. Ashley Action. Each year, she invested her $2,000 on the first market day of the year. So she didn't wait around trying to time that perfect time. Matthew Monthly divided his annual $2,000 into 12 equal portions, which he invested at the beginning of each month. This strategy is known as dollar cost averaging. So he just slipped in every month, regardless of whether it was up or down. Rosie Rotten had incredibly poor timing, or perhaps terrible bad luck. She invested her $2,000 each year at the market's peak. And the fifth one was Larry Linger. He left his money in cash investments, knowing opportunities to invest his money were just around the corner. So he kept waiting and sitting in cash and really never got in. So then they said, okay, how does that turn out after 20 years? If you could be the perfect market timer and hit every day, every year, the bottom point on your investment, what would it look like? Well, here's what they found. So Peter Perfect, his $2,000 annually, always invested at the spot-on best time. His investment after 20 years was worth $151,000. Ashley Action, remember, she'd been the one that just dropped it in at the beginning of the month, every month. And hers was 135, almost 135.5. Matthew Monthly, using, he split his money up and put it in each month. He was about the same, 135,000. Rosie Rotten didn't do as well, but really not that bad for having been the worst time every year for 20 years. She still had the 121. And Larry Linger, who sat in cash investments, and what they did for that was some what they call T-bills, treasury bills. That's what he was in. He made 44, so not so good. But I hope the takeaway from this is that getting in and doing it is what counts. Now, can anybody be that perfect? You always pick the perfect bottom time. No, it's impossible. You're going to be lucky if you can do it 1 out of 20 for the absolute bottom. And you really can't be that bad either. But you'll notice, Ashley Action, just whenever money came in, she dropped it in. She didn't worry about trying to figure out, was the market up, was the market down? Just drop it in once a year. And Matthew, pretty much the same outcome. So the takeaway, hopefully, is you just want to do it. You want to start because you can wait, and then you can do really poorly if you just know it's soon going to be, I'll wait because right now the market's hot and I want to wait till it and I'll invest. It doesn't work well. One last thing here, and I won't get into the details if you're interested afterwards. These are ways of taking the money out. How do you make sure that your money will last as long as you do? If we could time it right, we'd have, what do you want? 0, right? 0. Your money You can go down and have given it away to family and church and watched, the joy and the mission. But we don't know. And so basically, if I can give you another rule of thumb, which is just a basic rule, if you roughly assume that you can take out about 4% of the value of your money each year, it will largely last as long as you do. And you'll have an income stream that will probably continue to grow up with or increasing above inflation. So that's just a really rough takeaway. These are a couple, I dare say, fun for those of us who are money nerds. Those are a couple of ways. The middle one is that 4%, and that's kind of the gold standard. That's the number you hear tossed around a lot, is that, if you had $1 million, you could take out 40,000, and you could keep doing that forever and not really worry that you'd run out of money. So, where that can come in helpful is just figuring, how much do I need to have the kind of standard of living that I want or will need in retirement. And so knowing that about 4% is a good withdrawal, that's very helpful. So I just wanted to give you that rule of thumb. Our time is just about out, but any feedback or questions as we wrap up here on retirement? I hope the big takeaway is, if you can, you want to jump in and do it, even if it's as little as $25 a month. It's just get started, regardless. That's the message I wish I could have at almost every college graduation. It's just, here's the little footnote. Graduating seniors, get started now. Yes? Yes. You get a serious advantage there, don't you? So you get a major boost to your dollar. Yes. And in terms of an investment, I would say that's a high reward investment. Yeah? Absolutely. I mean, what did he say? You send it ahead and I'll take care of it. So when we do that, and of course there is that challenge too, isn't it? I mean, because the dollar, goes so much farther. How do we make sure we balance that there's people around here that need to know about Christ as well as where the dollar is there? And I think that's not to say we do one or the other, but we do prayerfully wrestle with how do we do it, because they're all God's children, and how do we make sure we do that? Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a reciprocal effect that comes back to benefit a church that's mission-minded. It's mission-minded locally here as well. So, yeah, to me, it's a both and. We've got one or more missionaries overseas that we do, and we don't want to do one or the other. We try to do both. It's a both and, just like, to me, I think it's important that it's a both and, that I'm giving in the present and also being ready to give, should time last long enough or I die sooner. So it's a both and I think a lot of Christian living is both and. It's being ready today, but planning for tomorrow and beyond. So it's It's a both and. A lot of life is a both and. Good. Any other reflections? Yes. You certainly see a lot of people doing that, don't you? Yeah, I think certainly financially that could point in that direction. So it'd be one of a whole host of different indicators of where God wanted you. But financially, that might well point to time to learn a second or third language. Good. Anybody else? All right. Well, thank you for each evening coming out. Thank you for journeying together on this. And I think it's especially fun. Yes, I like the numbers and all that. But it's seeing projects that you give to. It's seeing kids, grandkids that get a Christian education with teachers that are backing up what their parents are saying. It's seeing new people come in because of evangelistic series that could take place because we're participating. And I liken all this to stocks. I do enjoy stocks, and I pick stocks based on the return. And you cannot get a better return than a soul for the kingdom. It does not get better. And to me, that's why I do all of what I do. Not only do I enjoy it, but it's to be the best manager I can of what he's given. And as he gives more than I need, I keep trying to find ways to make it stretch for him as you've shared. So that's the fun of being a steward. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, we've just talked about retirement, and for many of us, that's a challenge. It's taken on a very different form in the last 15 or 20 years especially. And yet, Father, it's also exciting, maybe a bit intimidating, but a big challenge, that there's no retiring from what you call us to do. There's no age at which we quit making a kingdom difference, reaching out to our neighbors, sharing an encouraging word, maybe a good book or whatever it is. Father, thank you that we don't age out. We don't stand back and watch others. No, we just keep finding ways to minister for you at each stage of life. Be with us and guide us as we do seek to make a kingdom difference where you've planted us. In Jesus' name, amen. Well, thank you very much and have a good evening.